Hi, everybody. Welcome to Make Music Connect 2022. We're super excited to be with you guys today, and thank you so much for logging on. A few housekeeping notes to start off our meeting. If you are on Whova, you should see in the chat section 3 different links. One is download the app if you haven't downloaded it already. This is a great way to stay connected and be able to have it on your phone as well. The second link is the Publisher's Choice PDF. This comes with recommendations from some of our publishers, and the links go directly to Smart Music as well. The last link is your certification of attendance. You can download that in the chat, or you can download it in the description of any of the live sessions as well. We also have our recorded sessions, our pre-recorded sessions you can access at any point throughout the day. We do have the session recordings will be processed and out to you within the week. They will also be available to you until the end of July. Make sure that you use the community board for any questions that might not be answered, as well as the Q&A session in Whova to upvote any questions that you might have. We'll have a few minutes to go over them at the end of the session. And lastly, don't forget to follow the community guidelines. That is posted on the event homepage, and there will also be any other important event information posted there as well. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Chris, who will then introduce our guest.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Bernatos, and I am the Director of School Methods and Repertoire for Alfred Music. It's such a great honor to have you guys with us, and we really appreciate your participation in the event. We hope that today's event, you'll walk away with some new ideas and connections to help as you move through this upcoming school year. There's so many great sessions today, including presentations on tips and tricks for both Smart Music and Finale, live reading sessions for band, orchestra, choir, and jazz, advice for acquiring federal funding for your program, demystifying the world of copyright. I should listen to that one, and a ton more. I want to take a moment to thank all the presenters today. This event is really only possible because of your commitment to music education and sharing your experiences with us. And I'd also like to thank our publishing partners who year after year bring the highest level of educational content to the marketplace. They work to ensure that you have access to this content in Smart Music. Please take a minute and for sure, visit the publisher pages when you have a chance. And now I'd like to introduce the speaker for our opening session today. Brian Balmages. Brian is an award-winning composer and conductor, if in case you live under a rock and don't know Brian. His music has been performed throughout the world with commissions ranging from elementary schools to professional orchestras and chamber ensembles. He's in high demand as a composer and as a conductor internationally. As a conductor, he appears regularly with all state and region bands and orchestras throughout the United States, as well as with universities and professional ensembles throughout the world. After many years of shaping the band and orchestra catalogs of the FJH Music Company, Brian is now the Director of Digital Education and Make Music Publications for Alfred Music, and my colleague. So here you go. I'm going to hand this over now to Brian. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. It is great to see everybody. And for those of you that live under a rock, it is a pleasure to join you and to be with you all as well. I'm very much looking forward to spending a little bit of time with you all and just kind of a chance to go through all of this. So it should be a lot of fun. And I kind of want to just jump in and get started if we could. And so I really want to take the time and talk about passion and possibility. And what do I mean by that? I think very often as we are moving forward in the pandemic and as things are going on, I think one of the things that we are finding ourselves in is this world of in between right now, right? And kind of losing sight of what might be possible. And one of the reasons that I made this move was for possibility, but we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit more. I think when we all talk about passion and possibility, I think all of us immediately get in tune with passion, right? Absolutely in passion. And the things that I want to talk about today, to be clear, right? This session is not going to be a session where I'm going to be giving you a bunch of tools and tricks and rehearsal techniques. We've got so many wonderful clinicians that are going to be going through that. This is a jumpstart session to remind us why we do what we do, why events like this are here, and what our role is as we move forward. Okay, so we talk about passion, we talk about possibility. Well, I think one of the questions that we have to start asking ourselves, right? And we start wondering, okay, passion, that's something that we all understand a lot. But when it comes to possibility, I think a lot of us are questioning what's even possible right now, right? What is possible? Because I think a lot of us have gone through 2 very traumatic years, right? 2 very traumatic years. And I think now we are at this intersection of time where we can start to truly envision what is absolutely possible. And those are the things that I want to talk with you about today. So as Chris had mentioned, right, as a lot of you have heard, after a lot of thought, I had decided to make a change, right? And this was in part due to the pandemic. This was in part due to the trends that I was seeing. All right. But one of the big reasons that I wanted to make this change was because, as we all know, things had been moving in the direction of digital for a long time. And I think we all agree that COVID certainly accelerated that transition. Here we are in a virtual presentation right now. And it became very clear to me that with a company like Smart Music, especially, when you're looking at what's available with Smart Music, with Make Music, with Alfred, all those different things, there are incredible options that are available. And so one of the things that came to mind for me, which I think is applicable to all of us, is this great quote by George Bernard Shaw. You see things and you say why. And I think it's very easy to say, why did this happen? Why did I have to do this? Why did we have to learn all this? But then there's that second part. But I dream things that never were. And I say, why not? Right? And I think one of the things that we saw from the music community as we got into all of these things that were going on with Zoom and with virtual playings and the wonderful Upbeat app that had come out and all these different options that had happened, we found a way to adjust. We found a way to correct course. And I am so proud of the musical community, but I think we are just getting started. Just getting started. There's another great quote that I love by somebody that you may have heard of. Yeah, exactly. Think left and think right and think low and think high. Oh, the things you can think up if only you try. And so what this session is about today, this session is all about what happens when passion meets possibility. What happens when the reason that we all decided to become music teachers, whether you teach band, orchestra, choir, whether you are a composer, whether you are a college professor, whether you are a performer, when passion meets possibility, what is truly able to happen? And so this session is actually going to be, I like to call this a keynote in 3 acts. I'm going to divide this into 3 acts, much like we would divide a show into 3 acts, okay? And we're going to jump right into Act 1. And Act 1 is going to be divided even into several scenes, and it's called The Future in the Past. As we all know, we can learn a lot from the past, right? It informs the decisions that we make going on into the future. And I think there's a lot of really important tidbits that we can pull from there. And so I would like to draw from 3 different scenes to kind of remind us of things that have happened in the past, but also to inform us about ways things can happen in the future, okay? Or things that can happen in the future. So the first scene, I would like to go back to 2019 with the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. All right, and let me set the stage for you. I was there at the concert, right? And of course, always exciting to be in a live performance. And of course, this was pre-pandemic. And I remember the orchestra being on stage, and not unusual for this, but of course, as they all were out there, eventually they received a standing ovation, right? And a lot of you are probably thinking, okay, this is one of your scenes, right? An orchestra on stage with a standing ovation. What's the big deal? Here's the big deal. They had not played yet. Piqued your interest, didn't I? The orchestra was on stage, but they had not played yet. What was going on there? Well, for those of you who remember, who have already clawed into this, this was right after the Baltimore Symphony had been on lockout due to labor negotiations, due to conditions, due to salaries, due to healthcare. And they had been on lockout for quite some time. And this was their first concert back. And the standing ovation, they decided to all come out together. Normally you would see the orchestra all on stage. Nobody was on stage, and they all came out together, including their conductor, Marin Alsop. They all walked out together, and they got about a 5-minute standing ovation. So what's the lesson from this first scene? This is a reminder of how powerful music can be, especially when it's taken away, right? And so it becomes even more important that we find a way to rekindle that. And I think what we can all agree on is that we did see that. As things started to come back after the pandemic, we started to see that excitement. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but there's a cautionary tale in there as well that I want to address with all of you as well. So where do we go from here? Well, where we go from here is straight into Stoneman Douglas High School. And some of you may know this particular situation. This was in 2018, a year prior. Now, we can focus on a lot of the tragic elements, but I'm going to focus on one element in particular, which was that this was yet another situation where students were unable to practice, they were unable to play, and they were simultaneously coping with multiple mental challenges as a result of events that had been surrounding their lives. Okay? In that way, it sounds kind of familiar to what has been going on recently, even with the pandemic. Again, isolating those three elements. Well, a lot of you may know Alex Kaminsky. He's currently the director of bands at Vandercook College, but before that, he was the band director at Stoneman Douglas High School. And something that he said that really, really struck me. He said, when we were contemplating kids having gone, right? Kids not being together for a while. And when we finally did manage to get them back together, there were a couple things that we realized. He said, number one is that we were not overly concerned about tone quality right off the bat, right? We were not concerned with making sure that we spent hours and hours on the warm-up, on the fundamentals, on technique, on articulation, all of those things. He said there was one thing that became very clear to us more than anything else, and that was that the kids needed to be together and the kids needed to play together. And that became the overarching theme as we started to come out of the pandemic, that the kids needed to play. And I think the challenge is that as we have navigated our way out of this pandemic, and I think some of you may be feeling this as well, we went from that moment where everybody was so excited about being back together. And then from there, we went into a situation where not only was everybody back together, but we were just so excited to hear a tuning note, right? It might have been a terrible tuning note, but we were excited to hear it. And a lot of times we started to cry about that, right? And then over time, over months, it got to a point where suddenly the tuning note is not that great of a thing anymore. And then we became focused on what our ensembles were no longer able to do. All right. So this is a reminder for us to celebrate every victory, because a lot of us might be starting from scratch this year for the first time fully in maybe 3 years. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Okay. Scene 3, the Woodlands Concert Band. This was my personal moment. And this was the weekend of April 9th in 2021, having been off the podium for over 13 months. I had not stepped foot on a podium in over 13 months. And this was my first one back, my very first one back in Houston, Texas. Because why? Because of Texas, right? And I will never forget the surge of emotions that I felt, right? There was a slew of emotions that I was feeling and going through all of those emotions. And those are the emotions that I think all of us as teachers have been starting to go through again as we begin to have our first concerts, as we start to have our first band camps back, as we start to have all these other elements that have been taken away from us for so long. And I really want to remind us all that we should not forget those moments and not get caught up in the negativity. And that's going to be a big source of what we talk about during this entire session, is making sure that we stay positive. All right. So all of these things that we're talking about in this Act 1, these are all reminders, right, of things that have happened in the past, but we can see how each one of them has a direct impact on our future, particularly as it comes to this next year. Now, going into Act 2, I want to talk about something that might seem completely odd to talk about given everything that's gone on, but I want to talk about it. And that is something that I believe all of us have been given as a result of the past 3 years. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about superpowers. So what are these superpowers? And interestingly enough, you will hear from a dear friend of mine, Matthew Arau, as he closes everything tomorrow. And one of the things that he always talks about is how music is one of our superpowers. And how do we tie those two things together? Well, here's what I believe happened. A very interesting thing happened during the pandemic. As I mentioned, people started posting about all these amazing first moments, right? Tuning notes, right? I remember people posting about a clarinet player that squeaked, and somebody said it was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, because we were all laughing, because you could hear it and we were all laughing. Some kid made a mistake and played a wrong note, and everybody heard it and everybody started to laugh. And these were all beautiful moments. And people became so overwhelmed. I mean, when was the last time before that you had been overwhelmed by a tuning note, right? Absolutely amazing. And so this is a reminder to all of us as we go forward that it is very, very, very easy to look at the negative. It is very easy to look at everything that we've lost, right? We've lost rehearsal, we had lost concerts, travel. In my case, I had lost commissions and conducting, all those different things. But we have been given this superpower. And this is something that I want to really focus on with all of you for a minute. I wrote a post several months ago reminding everybody, it was called "You Are Not Defined by Your Grade Level of Music You Play." And the response was insane. The number of people that were so excited to read that. And I think for me, what I have seen is a lot of folks across the country, as they got over that superpower, that first superpower that had been gifted to them, this feeling of being so emotionally charged on the podium again for the first time, and some people maybe for years. And we started to drift away from that. And we became fixated again on my ensemble should be a grade 4 ensemble, but we're only playing grade 2 or grade 3. Right? My choir normally could be doing 4-part, and right now they're only doing 2-part. Right? My orchestra, by now we should be shifting, and we're not. Right? And so we started to become very negative. It's very focused on what my ensemble cannot do. And in some cases, trying to force it, right? Trying to push them there. When on the reality, sometimes they need us to meet them where they are, because we can make beautiful music at any grade level. And that should be our mantra for this year, to make the most glorious, beautiful music that we have ever made. And that becomes the achievement. The grade level will follow. Certainly the fundamentals will follow. We want to do all those things, but the focus of all of that always should be the music. And that is where we talk about the dwelling on negativity versus the pandemic being a superpower. So when I talk about superpower in particular, like, what do I mean? What do I mean by superpower? And so I'd like to share a story with you. And this is the Ohio State School for the Blind. And I remember I was conducting an honor band at Ohio State University, the Ohio State University. All of you alums, don't worry, I got it right. And I remember having four, I believe it was four students that were from the Ohio State School for the Blind. And they were all obviously legally blind. They had all learned their music and memorized it basically by listening to it and using Braille and all that, but they had learned their music and had learned roughly where the rehearsal numbers are. They didn't know them all quite exactly, but I could call it a rehearsal number, and within a second of everybody playing, they would know where they were in play, right? And I remember thinking to myself, you know, gosh, what a challenge that must be. And like, for them to not be able to see, they can't sight read, they can't do this, they can't do that, they have trouble doing this. And it's like, how amazing for them to be here. But I never thought of them as actually having a superpower until a lot of you are going to be able to identify with this. We were in the middle of a rehearsal and we were doing a piece. And while I know that really none of this has ever happened to any of you ever, right? We were in the middle of a rehearsal and I love them, but my flute section came in a measure early. And you know how it works, right? It's not just one, they all come in, right? And so the entire flute section had come in a measure early. And like any well-meaning group, not only had they come in early and all together, but they stayed a measure early. And they stayed a measure early for probably 15 seconds or so before I finally cut them off, okay? Here's the amazing part. As I was listening, as I was looking, there were two flute players who were not a measure off. The entire flute section, about 15 of them, were all a measure off except for two. And yes, you got it right. They were the blind flute players. So suddenly this perceived negativity, right? Something that was so awful, so bad that I thought, like, what a challenge for them, suddenly became the superpower that they were the only ones with me. And so I really want to emphasize that these superpowers that we are talking about, right? In their case, it was not being able to see, but my gosh, being able to hear. In our case, it was not being able to rehearse, but suddenly now being able to feel again from the podium. That is our greatest superpower. And it's one that we have got to latch on to. And so again, I come back to this, but I think there are a lot of opportunities for us going forward to remember why we got involved into music. So I truly believe these are our superpowers. And what are we talking about? We are talking about a new appreciation for live music. I mean, let's face it, I maybe this was you, but many programs I watched, there were many programs that just had their first live concert mere weeks ago since the beginning of 2020, right? Mere weeks ago. So a new appreciation for live music. And boy, talk about a superpower. You suddenly have an entire administration and parents all hyper invested in the music program because they were so overwhelmed to see it happen again. A new appreciation for the podium. That, folks, that is a superpower. So many of us over the years have gotten so preoccupied with bus schedules and seating charts and admin stuff and things like mandatory staff reviews and mandatory staff pods that have to be completed, different things, that all of that began to take priority. And it's like we tried to fit in a little bit of score study so that when we got on the podium, we could try to be functional. This has reminded us that the podium is our sacred place. That is the place, that is our happy place. When we get onto that podium, nothing in the world should matter except making music with these beautiful kids in front of us who are there, who have persevered, who are still there despite everything in the world that's been thrown at them. Think about what amazing music you can make when you have kids that have stuck with it this whole time, and then you suddenly have this new appreciation for music. Another superpower, rehearsals became magical again. Right? We talked about that, how tuning notes became magical, right? When was the last time that had happened pre-pandemic? Not only tuning notes becoming inspiring, but the rehearsals became spontaneous. Sometimes they were spontaneous because we never knew who was going to show up. Other times they became spontaneous because we just didn't know what we were going to get in terms of instrumentation or the level that we were going to have, or the mood of the people when they came in, but they all became spontaneous and we made it happen. We cannot lose that inspiration, nor can we lose that spontaneity. These are wonderful superpowers that we have been gifted. They've been given to us, and we cannot lose that. We cannot. All right. We've also been really inspired by new ways of teaching, new ways of learning, understanding, new ways of embracing, and new ways of experiencing music. Right. And I think potentially even more than any of that, new ways of connecting. Not remoting, but connecting. And new ways of connecting, and not only connecting, but leveraging our collective knowledge. And this is a big point, right? But understanding that we're trying to collect our collective knowledge, right? So where are we going with all of this? Like, where do we go with all of this, right? And where we go with this is straight steamrolling into Act 3. And what do I want to talk about with Act 3? Well, Act 3 is all about a new outlook, right? A completely new outlook. And as we're talking about this new outlook, one of the things that I think is really important to discuss is this idea of where we are headed. And when I talk about where we are headed, the most important thing we can talk about is what the last 2-3 years has done for us. And I believe that we are on the dawn of what I call the Great Reset. And what do I mean by the Great Reset? I believe we are at a gateway, a magical gateway, if we choose to embrace it and if we choose to walk through. This is a gateway to renewed passion, a gateway to renewed possibility. This is a way for us to have the opportunity to reimagine how we start our rehearsals, the room culture that we create. What is the room environment in the warm-up? And let's use that as an example. How many times have I been, and I think all of us have been, in a situation where the group is warming up, and whether it's the choir, of course, they have the best option of they're generally the most together when it comes to the warm up. Okay, but let's look at all of them, especially in the world of band and orchestra. But how many times do we see a group doing a warm up? And maybe in the case of band, we're hearing we do all of that, right? And the strings are doing their bowing exercises, but yet there's a third of the room is still unpacking, right? Or maybe they're not unpacking, but maybe they're talking to each other, or they're putting their instruments up, or their instruments are not, or they're not articulating at the same time. They're not in tune. I believe that we can play in tune before we take a tuning note, right? And we have this culture that we've created where the warm-up is not really ever together, right? Things are not together. They are not balanced. They are not in tune. And then we wonder why when we get into our rehearsal, things are not together and they're not balanced and they're not in tune. That's because we've set the precedence for that, right? And the reality is we get very good at what we practice. So what greater opportunity right now to have the Great Reset, where this fall we reimagine that environment, that culture, where suddenly we set that expectation. Every warm-up, we will all be ready. We will be all instruments out. We will play together. We will articulate together. And if we don't, we will fix it, because that means we will have to rehearse less later. We will articulate together. We will breathe together. We will breathe the same way together. We will sustain with a great balanced volume, thinking about a pyramid approach potentially. We will release together. We will move together. This is all part of this amazing, great reset. Now, as part of this great reset, we talked about this idea of being able to connect, right? And what are we doing right now? We're in Make Music Connect. It's what we are doing at this very, very moment. And in the spirit of connection, I'm going to give you a sneak peek of something that we are aiming to do as early as this fall. What I'm about to share with you is going to be mostly band related. Am I working on a strings version? You better believe it, because as most of you know, I live equally in the world of band and orchestra. And yes, choir people, I do write for choir. So come find me, all right? But I do love splitting my time, especially between band and orchestra. I love the fact that there are orchestra people that do not know I write for band, and there are band people that do not know that I write for orchestra. It makes me very happy, okay? So what is this secret thing that I'm talking about? This is a sneak peek at a potential reset event this fall. So a lot of you will recognize a lot of the names on this list. This is a virtual who's who of fabulous educators. Alicia DeSoto, who's there, along with Chris Meredith later down in that list. They were the band directors at Shadow Ridge down in Texas for quite some time, took their bands to Midwest several times. They are now high school directors in Louisville ISD and do incredible work and have done a lot of work, especially on what it's like to get people started at the beginning of the year. R.S. Golden, currently at Michigan State University, again, does incredible work, also has a great pedagogy history as a middle school band director. Cord Graves, who's actually currently in Alaska teaching right now, but he's done a lot of fabulous work at the middle school level, and actually has paired up a lot with Robert Herrings right next to him, who is at Henry Middle School, and I believe is still to this date the only band in Texas that has won the Texas Honor Band competition 3 years in a row upon being eligible. Really great work there. Tiffany Hitz at Rachel Carlson Middle School in Virginia, who is just gotten elected to the board of directors for the National Band Association. We have Alex Kaminsky, Vander Cook. Of course, Alex is one of the few people that I know that has now taken 3 different ensembles to Midwest. Darcy Bill Williams, a lot of you may know her from her After Sectionals podcast. If you don't know it, subscribe. It's wonderful. In addition to that, she's got incredible thoughts on rhythm and just overall teaching, does a great job. She was at Midwest this past year. And then we have the wonderful team of Christine and Heath Wolf, both from Utah. And Farmington Junior High was at Midwest. They've been there twice, once as a band, once as a jazz ensemble. And they've done a lot of incredible teaching, both in the world of winds, but also Heath does a lot of specialization with percussion. So what are we doing with all these people? What we are going to be doing is releasing a blog series for this fall. And this blog series is going to be how they tackle everything from tone to rhythm to intonation to sight reading to how kids can learn something for the first time when they are getting exposed to it from the very beginning. We're going to tackle things like articulation. And so we're going to start with a blog series that will be not only for you as teachers, but things that you can then pass on to your kids, whether it's in the form of smart music playlists that they'll be able to play from, but there's going to be a lot of opportunities, all right? And folks, this is the tip of the iceberg. This is truly the tip of the iceberg. And so I really want to emphasize, this is something that I want to do in the world of orchestra for sure, and expand this ultimately to choir as well. So be on the lookout for this. This will be something that we'll be coming out with for the fall, okay? So where are we going with all of this? I think where we're all going with this is that certainly we can agree that some doors have been shut over the last 2 years, but we are currently in a position to not only open a new door, but perhaps the door. And what is that door? That door is a door that had been closed inside of me. And take a moment and just think about this, okay? This is something that I went through, and I imagine a lot of you have gone through it too. I remember when I was going through college, and we may have a lot of first-year teachers even that are not even that far removed from college. But I remember when I was going through, and the entire time that I was going through, I was a really good trumpet player. I was a really good trumpet player. I practiced a lot. I had great fundamentals. I had a great sound. Intonation was all great. All of that was great. But I really didn't understand what it was like to play a phrase. And I remember sitting in the brass quintet. I had the fortune of being in the faculty brass quintet at James Madison University. And I sat next to Jeannie Little, who is currently in Montana teaching at Montana State University, an incredibly musical player. And we would finish every rehearsal and she would look over at me. She said, "Brian, you sound amazing." And I was like, "Oh, thank you." And she would say, "Are you ever going to play a phrase?" And I, I remember looking at her and say, "Well, sure. Do you want me to play louder, or do you want me to play like articulate more? Like, what do you want me to do?" And I never got it. And it wasn't until I met Gary Green down at the University of Miami, and many of you know him, and also Thomas Sleeper, the director of orchestras at University of Miami. It wasn't until I got there that I truly started to understand what it was like to feel a musical phrase. And what I felt like was that I had this door inside of me, and I think a lot of you probably have experienced this too, this door inside of me that had all this great music in it, but it had been closed and I didn't know how to open it. I had no key. And along came somebody, Gary Green, Thomas Sleeper, you. Along came you. And you walk up to this kid with all this musical potential. And you finally took that key and opened that door that had been closed for all that time. Folks, this is why we are here. Okay? Yes. Are we going to learn about articulation? Yes. Are we going to listen to new music over the next 2 days? Yes. Are we going to learn about intonation? Yes. Are we going to be inspired? Yes. We're going to do all of those things. But at the end of the day, we are here to inspire and open the door for all of these beautiful young musicians who are coming into the world, who are going to be the next generation of artists. We are here to open their door. And so I want this next 2 days to be a reminder of what maybe it was like previous to conduct players with a closed musical door versus what it will be like potentially when we conduct a musician with a wide open gateway to musicianship. This, folks, is where we suddenly become on top of the world. This is where we explore music as a community and as an artistic and emotional outlet for all of us. This is where we remind ourselves how the last 2 years should be motivating us more than ever to move beyond the notes, to move beyond what's on the page and into a deeper relationship, not only with the music, but with each other. So that's where we start asking ourselves, what am I going to do differently going forward into next year? How am I going to be different as a conductor, as a musician, as an inspiration leader? How am I going to open this door to this wonderful musician who's got all the technique in the world, but doesn't know what it's for yet? And so when we look at the future of passion and possibility, I want to remind you, inspire like you have never before. This is the time. Literature selection, connect with the music. You'll have plenty of opportunities to hear new literature, right? Connect with the music, connect with the students, and connect the audience with all of those. Now, passion on the podium, right? That's a big deal, but don't forget passion off the podium because it is contagious. Don't forget about parent and community involvement. How can we get them involved and be part of this new passionate movement that we're trying to create? And then most importantly, the emotional involvement, right? Engage the kids, but also engaging the parents in your administration, right? Again, a lot of us just started that within the past month. Keep riding that wave. Keep riding that wave. Because the more we do that, the more we wind up having all of our own Baltimore Symphony Orchestra moments. Those moments where everybody wants to give you a standing ovation before you've even started. That's what I want you to take away from this session. That's what I'm hoping we will take away from the next 2 days. And that is the energy, the seed, the goal, and the resulting movement of everything that we do going forward. So thank you all very much. I would love to open this up for questions and anything else that anybody would love to know, because I am all about interacting with people. So there we have it.
Thank you, Brian. We do have a few questions that have come in on our Q&A board on Whova. All of you audience members, if you have a question, feel free to look in there or upvote a question that we already have. We'll just start with the one that has the most upvotes and kind of work our way down from there. So the top question we have is, do you have any tips on motivating your students to practice with passion?
Yeah. Yelling, I think, works very well. So no, that's a great question. It's a great question. How to motivate kids to practice with passion, right? So there's a lot of things that I think are really a big part of that. And potentially one of the biggest things is to create a sense of ownership and a sense of connection. There are directors that I know that sometimes try to link certain emotions with a piece of music, or they even have kids kind of really identify with the storyline of a piece, right? This is where programmatic music really comes in handy, because it allows kids to not only know what a piece is about, but I like to challenge kids and say, okay, I want you to play and practice this passage, right? If we're going to practice that, but everything you do has got to be aimed at the emotion, right? Are you trying to communicate fear? Are you trying to communicate anger? And maybe give them the opportunity to explore that. Like, can we do that? Now, of course, as the teacher, we have to rein things in, because sometimes if a kid wants to explore something with anger, they might make an uncharacteristic sound, right? And so we've got to teach them to rein that in. But I'm all about reining that in, but at least that knowing that it's coming from a place, right? It's coming from somewhere. And so I love for kids to make that emotional connection where when they're practicing, it's not just to get better, but it's to achieve something that we've talked about in rehearsal, right? This passage is all about anger, or this passage is all about joy, right? This passage is all about being uplifted. There's a great piece of mine that a lot of people do called Forever Joyful. And it's like, you need to sound like joy. Do you sound like joy? And remind them of that. Hey, you're playing great, but do you sound like joy? What does joy sound like? I don't know. It's lighter, it's lifting. Oh, okay, then let's do that. And so I love to make that connection between the emotion and the notes on the page. And to be clear, I think we do that right away. Too often we say, you know what, let's get the notes down and then we'll go into that world of passion, right? The problem is, as we discussed earlier, the more you do something, the better you get at it. And so what happens is we wind up with a bunch of kids who have learned the notes, and then we try to turn on that passion switch, but then the muscle memory has already set in. They've already learned it another way. So then really what they have to do is unlearn it and relearn it. And that's why I introduce all these things, even from the get-go. Even when there's sight reading, I introduce it.
Wonderful. The next question I have for you, well, the community has for you, is how can you keep the passion alive for music throughout the year?
Yeah, so that's a great question. There's a couple things. Number one, I can't emphasize it enough, repertoire selection. All right. We've all been in those situations where we've picked a piece because it's like, well, we know that the group's going to sound good. And then we get 3 weeks into it and we can't stop rehearsing it soon enough, right? We're so done with it and we want to just throw it in the fire. And then there's other pieces that we've done for 3 months, and yet we're sad to put them away because we just haven't gotten quite enough of it, right? It's like an intimate friendship. We just weren't ready to part. And so I think repertoire selection is a big part of it. Right. I think these conferences, again, are a big part of that as well, to make sure that we are connecting with like-minded people who have share similar visions. And I think that's another great way to do it. Looking at interviews and interacting with people. I also think getting composers to come in, right? Even though a lot of them might charge, there might be a small fee of a couple $100 or something like that to bring a composer into your room, whether it's band, choir, or orchestra, right? And having them come in and talk about a piece of music is very effective in getting kids very excited, and doing a rehearsal like that. Of course, bringing them in person, that's even better. But the beautiful thing about technology is we have multiple ways of bringing people in, right? And I think we need to explore that even more. But I love that idea of making sure that you are keeping yourself on that steady diet of passion foods, right? Always thinking about, what do I need to do to stay passionate and keep that going? Because it does get hard, and we get into the slog of things over and over again. And that's where it's more important than ever to make sure, okay, let me pull in this composer, let me do this, let me do that, and make sure that we are constantly referring back to the point of the music.
Great. Thank you, Brian. That brings us to time. Few things before we officially wrap up. Don't forget to download your certificate of attendance. It's in the chat and in the description of the session. We do have a very short survey for each session. So if you guys could do us a favor and please rate this session. You can do that by clicking rate the session button, and then it takes about 2 minutes.
I get maximum numbers, by the way. I get all 5s. Is it go to 5? Does it go to 5? What's it go to?
We do have a little bit of time before the next session. So if your question didn't get answered, it's a great opportunity to make it a community board post, and we can get some different thoughts and insights on that. And lastly, just thank you guys for coming to the keynote session. We hope that you have a great time over the next 2 days, and hope to see you in another session soon. Thanks, everybody.
Bye all.